My name is Ethan Wallace. I'm 30, and last week at my dad's birthday party, he stood up in front of the whole family and asked Ethan what happened to the $200,000 I wired you. I had no idea what he was talking about, but my brother Caleb. He went pale and dropped his bourbon glass. That was the moment I realized someone close to me had stolen a fortune and framed me for it. And worse, my own mother might have helped cover it up. It was a rare, cool evening in Charleston for late August. Spanish moss swayed lightly from the old oaks that lined the backyard of my parents' house. Fairy lights blinked overhead as a dozen familiar faces clinked glasses celebrating my father's 67th birthday. I hadn't been home in nearly 3 years. Work and life in Denver kept me busy, or maybe I just didn't try hard enough. I watched my father, Frank Wallace, leaning back in his chair at the head of the table, chuckling at one of Uncle Mark's sarcastic toasts. Mom, always meticulous, had gone all out with the setup. Long farmhouse tables, linen runners, even her lemon tart that she only made on special occasions. Caleb sat 2 seats down from me, nursing a bourbon. He looked sharp as always, crisp navy blazer gold watch that gleamed under the garden lights. Rachel, my old college friend and the only person I kept in touch with back here, whispered something about him looking extra polished lately. I smiled, trying to relax into the rhythm of the evening. I had missed this, the noise, the banter, the food. I was halfway through a story about my boutique launch when my father stood up, raised his glass, then lowered it with a frown. "Ethan," he said, voice loud and clear, "what happened to the $200,000 I transferred to you?" Every conversation died. I blinked. What I asked. Dad's gaze was steady. "6 months ago, 200 grand. For your business, you said you needed it in one lump sum." I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My hands went cold. "Dad, I never received that money," I said slowly. Someone coughed. A fork clinked against a plate. Caleb, still holding his glass, froze mid-sip. Then his fingers slipped. The glass fell, hit the brick patio, and shattered. All eyes turned to him. What he said too fast. "What are you looking at me for?" Mom stood up quickly, fussing over the spilled bourbon and broken glass. "I'm serious," I continued, still looking at Dad. "I got the initial 50,000 you and I agreed on. That was all." "But your email," Dad started. "I never sent you another email." He frowned. "You asked for a full transfer because you had some supplier deadlines." "No," I said firmly. "I didn't." There was a long silence. Dad looked at Mom. She avoided his eyes, busy cleaning Caleb's mess. Caleb stood rigid like a statue. Uncle Mark cleared his throat. "Maybe this isn't the time, Frank." No. Dad said, his voice rising. "I need to understand this. 200,000 doesn't just disappear. You're telling me you didn't get it. I swear on everything I have." "I didn't," I said. Dad's jaw tightened. He sat back down slowly, staring at the table like he was putting together a puzzle that didn't make sense. The laughter and warmth from earlier had evaporated. Rachel gently touched my elbow under the table. Caleb finally muttered, "Maybe it's some kind of mix-up. Wire errors happen all the time." Dad looked up at him. "You would know I'm just saying," Caleb said quickly. "Banks mess things up. I've had it happen before." But he couldn't hold eye contact. Not with Dad, not with me, not with anyone. Dinner went on, but the ease was gone. People shifted in their chairs, tried to make small talk, but the air was thick. I sat there, heart pounding, mind racing. If Dad had sent that money and I didn't receive it, then someone else had. Someone close enough to fake my voice, my style, my trust. Rachel leaned over during dessert, her voice low. "We need to talk. Later." I nodded, but my eyes never left Caleb, who suddenly looked very, very uncomfortable. I barely slept that night. The guest room was just as I remembered it, same blue plaid comforter, same creaky ceiling fan. But the air felt heavier now, like the walls were pressing in with old doubts and fresh betrayals. I stared at the ceiling, my mind spinning through timelines, emails, bank accounts. Nothing added up. Morning came early. I slipped out before anyone else was up and drove down to Waterfront Park. The benches there were worn but peaceful, and the breeze off the Cooper River helped clear my head. I thought about Denver, about the last 3 years. I had built a solid career at Vance & Co., one of the better fashion houses in the region. I handled creative campaigns, branding, and slowly worked my way up. But the longer I stayed, the less it felt like mine. Everything there belonged to someone else. The idea to start something of my own had brewed for years. Something clean, curated, high-quality menswear tailored for real working professionals, not runways. I called it WLS and sketched out the whole business plan in my cramped apartment nights and weekends. When I pitched it to Dad, he didn't laugh. That meant something. Mom, on the other hand, rolled her eyes, said it was too risky, that I was walking away from stability. Caleb had smirked and said something about how creative people weren't built for logistics. Still, Dad invited me to fly back to Charleston for a proper sit-down. I brought printouts, spreadsheets, mock designs. We spent 3 days going through everything. At the end, he nodded and said he'd support me, but he'd do it in parts. $50,000 now to get started. More is needed depending on progress. That first $50,000 changed everything. I left Denver, signed a lease on a small studio space near King Street, and started meeting with local tailors and designers. Rachel helped where she could, even shot my first lookbook for free. Sales were slow at first, as expected, but the buzz was good. A few features in regional blogs, one tiny piece in Southern Living, enough to feel the momentum. Then came the slowdown. Supply chain issues, late shipments, unexpected city permits. I emailed Dad, gave him an update, but never asked for more money. I was waiting until I had something concrete to show him. I wanted him to feel proud, and now he thinks I lied. That I asked for more, took it, and vanished. I leaned forward on the bench, elbows on knees. None of this felt real. And yet the details were too specific. He thought he got an email from me. He made the transfer. It was gone. Back at the house, breakfast was quiet. Mom didn't make eye contact. Dad had already left for the golf course. Caleb was nowhere to be seen. Rachel picked me up a little before noon. We grabbed coffee and drove aimlessly, eventually ending up at an old bookstore we used to hang out in during college. She waited until we were tucked in a corner before speaking. "You believe him, right?" she asked. "Dad," I said. "Yeah. If he said he wired the money, he did, so who the hell got it?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Rachel stared at me. "You think Caleb—" I shrugged. "He was awfully pale last night, and way too defensive." She nodded slowly. "I've seen him around that bit. New car, same watch as you in the platinum version. And you mentioned a ski trip to Aspen. With who? He doesn't even have a job." Something clicked. Not just the money, the email. Someone would have needed access to my tone, my phrasing, my relationship with Dad. Rachel leaned in. "You need to dig, quietly, before anything gets buried." She was right. I had to trace the steps piece by piece. If I was going to clear my name, I needed to know exactly when and how everything started going wrong. First thing I did was log into my bank account. I combed through every statement from the past year, scanning for any large deposits I didn't recognize. Nothing. No wire transfer, no trace of $200,000. I called my bank's customer service line, got routed to a senior specialist, and spent 40 minutes verifying my identity. Once I explained the situation, they agreed to flag any large inbound transfers from the past 6 months. Still nothing. "Are you sure the transfer was made to this account?" the specialist asked. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's the only account I've ever used for business or personal. She hesitated. There's another account linked to this profile. A joint account. Opened about 7 months ago. What I didn't open any joint account. It's under your name and someone named Caleb Wallace. I nearly dropped the phone. Can you tell me if any large transfers went through that account? There was one, she said after a pause. 200,000 deposited 6 months ago from an account belonging to Frank Wallace. My heart was pounding. And the money. Withdrawn 2 days later. Full amount. Cashier's check. I felt like the floor had dropped beneath me. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the dashboard in disbelief. Caleb had somehow opened a joint account using my name or forged my signature and funneled the money through it. And Dad believed he was sending it to me. I needed to talk to Dad, right now. I called his number. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I called again. Same result. On the third try, it went straight to voicemail. Then a text popped up. From Mom. I know you're upset. Just let it go. Don't stir the pot. This family's been through enough. I stared at the screen. My hands were shaking. Let it go. My name was being dragged through the mud. My reputation with Dad was shattered. And someone had stolen 200 grand using my identity. And my own mother was asking me to be quiet. I put the phone down and started the car. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't drive home. Instead, I turned off onto Bay Street and headed toward Rachel's place. She lived in a small apartment above a florist shop, one of those old Charleston buildings with narrow staircases and creaky floors. I parked, climbed the stairs 2 at a time, and knocked. She opened the door almost immediately, holding a mug of coffee in one hand and wearing that same concerned look from last night. You didn't sleep either, she said. I shook my head and walked in. The place smelled like jasmine and cinnamon, comforting in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I talked to the bank, I said, sinking into her couch. She sat across from me, alert now. What did they say? There's a joint account, under my name, and Caleb's. Her eyes widened. You didn't open it? Of course not, but Dad's transfer went there, 200 grand, and it was withdrawn 2 days later. Jesus. She sat back, stunned. I rubbed my face with both hands. It's not just the money, it's identity theft, it's fraud, and it's personal. She was quiet for a while, then said, You know, a couple months ago I saw Caleb pull up in a black Range Rover. Brand new, like fresh plates, dealer sticker still on it. I looked up. You sure positive? And that watch he wore last night, Rolex Daytona. At least 20 grand, probably more. I remember because I once dated a guy who wouldn't stop talking about his. I exhaled slowly. He doesn't have a job. Where would he get that kind of money? She raised an eyebrow. You're asking me? I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. He took it. I just don't have proof yet. Rachel nodded. Then we find proof. I need help, I said. I can't do this alone. And I can't exactly go to Mom or Dad. She tilted her head. What about your uncle, the one at the party? Mark. I blinked. Uncle Mark. He was Dad's younger brother. Retired now, but had spent 30 years in law enforcement. He had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, the one who watched more than he spoke. And he had pulled me aside once years ago to warn me about trusting Caleb too easily. Rachel read my expression. Worth a try. I stood. I'll talk to him. I called Uncle Mark from the parking lot. He answered on the third ring. Ethan, he said, surprised. Didn't expect to hear from you this early. I need to talk. Can I come by? A pause. Sure. You still remember where I live? I'll be there in 20. His house was on the outskirts of town, a quiet cul-de-sac with overgrown lawns and mailboxes leaning at odd angles. When I pulled up, he was already on the porch, coffee in hand. We sat in silence for a moment before I spoke. "I need your help." His eyes narrowed, not suspicious, but cautious. "What kind of help?" I told him everything. The joint account, the forged access, the withdrawal. Mom's message, Caleb's reaction, Rachel's observations. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back and blew out a long breath. "Sounds like someone's been busy covering their tracks." I looked at him. "You think I'm crazy?" "No," he said. "I think you're in deeper than you realize." "What do I do?" He sipped his coffee. "First, get a copy of that account application, the one Caleb supposedly signed with you. Then we compare signatures. If it's forged, we've got something. And if the bank won't release it, you file an identity theft report. That forces them to cooperate. I can help draft the paperwork." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you." He nodded. "But Ethan..." "Yeah, you need to be ready. Once this starts, it doesn't stop. Families don't always survive things like this." I swallowed hard. He already broke it. Mark looked at me, then said quietly, "Let's make sure he doesn't get away with it." He stood up from his porch chair and motioned for me to follow him inside. The house was quiet and smelled like cedar and old paper, just like I remembered. We stepped into his study, a small room crammed with filing cabinets and bookshelves lined with thick legal volumes. He waved me to sit while he unlocked one of the cabinets. After your dad retired, Mark began rummaging through a drawer he kept most of his estate paperwork with a firm downtown. "Jack Niles, you remember him vaguely," I said. "Didn't he handle the will after Grandpa died?" "Exactly. Old school lawyer. Keeps everything on paper, double files, notarized copies. If there's any documentation about that account or financial authorizations, it'll be in Niles's archives." He pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the desk. Inside were photocopies of the original estate plan amendments and a handful of letters. "Your father updated his estate plan last year," Mark said. "Added a financial power of attorney. Said it was for emergency access in case of medical issues." "Let me guess," I said, already dreading the answer. "Caleb's name is on it?" Mark nodded slowly. "Yours too. But something about it never sat right with me." I asked Frank if he was sure about the document. He brushed me off. He handed me the photocopy. I stared at the signature next to mine. It looked like my handwriting, but something about the E was off, too smooth, too deliberate. "I never signed this," I said. I figured Mark replied, "But unless we compare it to the original or a certified copy, there's no way to prove it. And even then, you'd need an expert." "Can we see the originals?" "I'll call Jack. He's not in the office much anymore, but he still takes family appointments. If we ask for access under the guise of updating your father's file, he might open it up." I felt the tension ease just slightly. "Do it." Mark grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts. While he waited for the call to connect, I looked back at the document, my signature next to Caleb's. Dad's initials at the bottom, a notary seal. It all looked so real. A voice picked up on the other end. "Jack, it's Mark Wallace. Got a minute?" They exchanged pleasantries, then Mark cut to the chase. "I've got a situation with my brother's estate documents. Need to review the POA forms and any updates filed last year. Can we come by today?" A pause, then. Jack's voice faint but clear. 1 o'clock. Be quick. I've got court prep after." Mark hung up. "We're in." We left shortly after noon and drove to Jack's office, a stately brick building tucked between two larger office towers. Inside, the decor hadn't changed since the 90s. Dark wood paneling, brass lamps, the scent of old books, and stronger coffee. Jack Niles was smaller than I remembered, hunched but sharp-eyed. He greeted Mark with a handshake and me with a curious glance. "You're Ethan," he said. Heard you moved out west. I'm back now, I said. He didn't press. Instead, he led us to a file room in the back and opened a cabinet labeled Wallace Family. He pulled a thick file and placed it on the table. Everything's in here. Updates powers of attorney transfer instructions. You've got 30 minutes. He left us alone. Mark opened the folder. We flipped through pages quickly but carefully. Then we found it. The original power of attorney form. The notary seal was slightly smudged. The signature was different. It's not the same as the one in your copy, I said. Mark nodded. I'll scan both. We'll get a handwriting analyst if we need to. Then another page caught my eye. A bank transfer authorization form, signed again by me, but with a different date. A month before the actual transfer. My throat tightened. He planned it ahead, not impulsive, calculated. We scanned every relevant page and left before our time ran out. Back in the car, Mark drove in silence. This goes deeper than I thought, he said eventually. He forged multiple documents, I said, and no one noticed. People see what they want to see, especially when it comes to family. I didn't reply. My mind was already racing toward the next step. He wasn't going to get away with it. Not this time. We didn't speak much on the drive back to Jack's office the next day. Mark had called again that morning telling Jack we needed to review something he believed had been misfiled. Jack agreed to a brief follow-up. When we arrived, Jack handed us the Wallace family file and left us alone once more. I thumbed through the documents methodically, still rattled by the forgery we uncovered yesterday. But something deeper was bothering me, like a string out of place in a carefully stitched pattern. I paused when I reached a document labeled Shareholder Transfer Agreement. I didn't remember ever signing something like that. The header read, Transfer of Interest in Carter & Wallace Menswear Boutique. I opened it slowly. My name was listed as transferor, Caleb's name as transferee. It stated that I had willingly transferred 51% ownership of my boutique to Caleb. The signature at the bottom was mine, or it was supposed to be, but next to it was my date of birth. Only it was wrong. March 17th, 1987. My actual birthday is March 16th. My stomach dropped. Mark, I said, passing him the document. Look at this. He scanned the paper, his brow furrowed. Did you sign this? No. And that's not my birthday. He flipped back to the notarization stamp. Same notary as the other forged forms, same handwriting in the dates. I leaned against the table. He didn't just steal the money, he tried to take the business too. Mark opened his notebook and jotted something. Let's talk to Jack. We found him in his cramped office sorting files. Mark didn't bother with pleasantries. Jack, where did this shareholder transfer come from? Jack adjusted his glasses, took the paper and frowned. That was filed by your mother, said it was a temporary safeguard. She insisted it came from Ethan, said you were busy traveling, didn't want to be bothered. I stepped forward. She told you I signed it. She said she witnessed it, brought the notarized copy herself. Mark's voice turned sharp. Jack, did you confirm it with Ethan? Jack looked uncomfortable. I assumed. She was convincing, and Caleb was always around. I thought he was managing the business by your choice. I took the paper back. This signature isn't mine. And the birth date's wrong. Jack sighed, slumping slightly. Then you need to report this. It's not just forgery. It's fraudulent conveyance. If it holds up, he could control the business legally. Unless we prove it's fake, Mark added. Jack nodded. I'll cooperate. I'll draft an affidavit stating what I was told and who delivered the documents. We left his office with that document burning a hole in my thoughts. The betrayal wasn't just Caleb now. My own mother had delivered forged paperwork to a lawyer. She vouched for it. Mark said nothing as we walked back to the car. I stared at the boutique's LLC paperwork again. My name stripped off the top. They wanted to erase me, slowly, methodically, like I had never been part of it. But I was done being quiet. This was war. The rain had just started as I pulled into Rachel's driveway. Her house sat tucked behind a grove of live oaks, moss draped like curtains along the branches. I didn't even knock. She opened the door as I reached it, like she had been watching from the window. "You look like hell," she said, stepping aside. "I feel worse." I dropped onto her couch and handed her the copy of the forged shareholder transfer. She scanned it quickly. "Date of birth's wrong. Exactly. And my mother delivered it. Personally." Jack confirmed it. Rachel sat down slowly. "You think she's in on it?" "I don't know what to think anymore. But it's not just negligence. It's coordinated. Someone forged my signature. Someone knew I wouldn't be around to stop it." She was quiet for a long moment, then stood up and went into the other room. When she came back, she had a small voice recorder in her hand. "What's that?" I asked. She held it up. "I've been cleaning up old files. I used this to record background audio for a short film project. I brought it to your dad's birthday party, thought I might get some usable family chatter for ambient sound." My eyebrows rose. "You recorded the party not intentionally. It was running in my purse during most of the evening." She sat next to me and clicked through the files. Static, clinks of glasses, laughter, a burst of music, then voices. Rachel fast-forwarded until we reached a part where my mother's voice became clear. "If anything comes up," she was saying, "just tell your father Ethan must have forgotten. He'll believe it." Then Caleb's voice, hushed but audible. "You're sure he won't question you? Not with everything going on. I'll take care of the paperwork. He doesn't need to know." Rachel froze. I leaned forward, barely breathing. "I don't want to lie to him," Caleb added. "You're not lying. You're protecting him. And your father. We can't let Ethan ruin this opportunity for you." Click. Rachel stopped the tape. For a moment, neither of us moved. "That's it," I whispered. "That's collusion. She planned it, coached him." Rachel nodded slowly. "You have more than suspicion now." I leaned back, mind spinning. "I need a copy. Can you send that to me?" "Of course." She uploaded the audio file to a flash drive and handed it over. My hands trembled as I took it. "This changes everything." She placed a hand on my arm. "You still okay?" I nodded, then shook my head. "I don't know. I thought maybe I could understand this, that maybe there was a misunderstanding. But this is betrayal. My own mother." Rachel's eyes were steady. "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." I stared at the flash drive. It felt heavier than it should have. For the first time in days, I had real proof. A voice, a plan, a lie. And now a new kind of war was beginning. Mark called me just before sunrise. I hadn't slept, just lay in bed listening to the hum of the fan and the distant barking of a neighbor's dog. He told me to come by his place again. Said he had something I needed to see. When I arrived, Mark was already in the study files, spread out across the desk like a puzzle halfway solved. "I found something," he said, tapping a weathered envelope. "Your dad's original will, dated 4 years ago." I opened it carefully. The paper smelled musty, but the ink was still crisp. My name was clearly listed next to Caleb's. Equal shares in all estate assets, including the boutique. I scanned it twice to be sure. There it was in black and white. A time before suspicion, before secrets, but this version never made it into Jack's files, Mark continued. I checked again this morning. It was replaced by the new one last summer. And the new one. "Your name is gone. Completely. Caleb is listed as sole heir to the boutique. Everything else gets divided, but that part is his outright." I sank into the chair. Why would Dad change that? Mark shook his head. That's what I'm not sure of. Either he changed his mind, or someone influenced him to. He handed me both versions. You need to talk to him. He might not even realize what's been done. My phone buzzed on the table. Dad. I stared at the screen, heart thudding. It was the first time he'd called me since the birthday party. I answered with a hesitant hey. His voice was tired. Ethan, I want to see you. Today. Alone. Of course. When noon. At the park. The one near your old school. I'll be there. He hung up. I sat back, phone still in hand. Mark raised an eyebrow. He wants to meet. Mark nodded. Then you'll know where he stands. I left his house with the copies of both wills tucked under my arm, heart pounding harder than it had in days. As I drove toward the park, questions flooded my mind. Did Dad really sign away my share? Did he know what Mom and Caleb were doing, or was he another victim in all of this? By the time I pulled into the gravel lot near the benches, I saw him already seated beneath the elm tree. Hands folded, gaze fixed on the lake ahead. I parked, grabbed the folder, and walked slowly toward him, unsure whether I was about to find clarity or another layer of betrayal. He didn't stand when I approached, just nodded slightly as if the weight of everything between us made even small gestures hard. I sat beside him on the bench. The wind off the lake stirred the edge of his coat. You look tired, I said. So do you. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Your mother told me you'd gotten reckless, that you weren't focused. She said you'd burned through the money I gave you and were blaming Caleb. I stared at him. And you believed her? He turned to face me. I didn't want to, but the way she said it, she sounded convinced. And Caleb backed her up. I pulled the folder from my lap and set it between us. I didn't spend that money. I never even received it. He opened the folder slowly, his eyes scanning the printed bank statements, the copies of forged forms, and finally the transcription of the audio recording Rachel had found. He stopped reading. I watched his jaw tighten. You have proof, he said finally. Yes. Caleb accessed the account. The signature on the shareholder transfer is forged, and that recording Mom told him to lie. He closed the folder and didn't speak for a long while. I could see something shifting in his eyes, like the last piece of denial had finally broken free. I should have known, he murmured. I've seen Caleb lie before, but I never thought your mother. I didn't think she would go that far. She wanted to protect him, I said, even if it meant turning you against me. He rubbed his face with both hands, and I let her. I didn't say anything. I feel like a fool. You're not. You were misled. They played on your fears, your desire to keep the family together. He stared out at the lake again. When your mother asked me to change the will, she said it was temporary, that it was just to stabilize things while you were getting your life in order. And did I seem unstable? No, he said quietly. You seemed determined, focused. I ignored that because I wanted to believe her. I wanted peace. I put a hand on the folder. You can fix this, but I'm not asking for revenge. I just want the truth to matter again. He nodded slowly. Let me think. I need time. I need to talk to your mother. And Caleb, I understand. He turned to me, his expression softer than I'd seen it in months. Thank you for not giving up. I almost did. But you didn't. That counts for something. We sat there not as father and son at war, but as two people trying to untangle the knots between them. Eventually he stood. I'll call you in a few days. We'll talk more. I nodded. He walked away without another word, but something in his posture was lighter, less burdened, and for the first time in a long while I felt hope crack through the surface of everything else. 3 days after confronting my father, things escalated quickly. Caleb didn't wait long. He stormed into my boutique during lunch hour, loud and smug like always, tossing a letter on the counter in front of two customers. "That's a cease and desist," he said loudly. "Try saying my name again, see what happens." I picked up the letter, calmly scanning the header from a pricey Charlotte law firm. Behind my back, I heard one of the customers whisper. Just what Caleb wanted. "You need to leave," I said. He leaned forward. "You think you're winning, this isn't over. I'll destroy everything you've built." "You already tried," I said, "and I'm still standing." He scoffed and left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Rachel came by after closing. We sat in the back office going through the letter. She shook her head. "He's getting desperate. This isn't about legal standing, it's intimidation." "Then it's time we respond." I called my lawyer, forwarded everything we had, and by morning a response was drafted. But I wanted more than just a legal rebuttal. I wanted to end this. Mark called with news. Jack Niles had agreed to provide a notarized affidavit confirming everything: the forged signatures, the pressure from my mother, the original documents. We finally had a foundation. I returned to Rachel's with a growing file. She added her own contributions, screen recordings of Caleb bragging about his car, a luxury trip to Turks and Caicos. An Instagram post he had since deleted captioned "Easy Money." The timestamps coincided perfectly with the missing funds. By midweek, I met with my lawyer in person. We prepared a countersuit: fraud, defamation, forgery, and economic damages. The potential payout was more than monetary, it was the truth formalized. 2 days later, Caleb's lawyer sent a response. They proposed mediation. It wasn't surrender, but it was the first sign of retreat. That night, I received a call from Dad. He sounded shaken. "Your mother told me what she did," he said. "I didn't know, Ethan. I swear to you. I believe you now. I just wish it hadn't taken all this. I want to make it right." We met in his study the next morning. He pulled out an old leather folder and laid it in front of me. Inside was a newly signed document reinstating my 50% ownership of the boutique. "I've spoken with the estate lawyer. The will is being amended. Caleb will no longer have financial control over anything until we settle this." I swallowed hard. "Thank you. I let things go too far. I let your mother and brother convince me of things I should have never believed. You deserved better." He paused, then added quietly, "I hope this is a start." Rachel, Mark, and I regrouped to prepare for mediation. It felt more like trial prep. We weren't just countering false claims, we were pushing back with force. When the day arrived, I walked into the law office with every document, every receipt, every word carefully prepared. Caleb sat across the table, shoulders tense, jaw tight. The mediator opened the session. My lawyer spoke first, laying out our evidence with sharp precision. When he finished, the room fell silent. Caleb tried to respond, but his voice lacked its usual arrogance. He stammered through denials, none of which held weight. When I finally spoke, I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth slowly and clearly, for the first time in a room where everyone had to listen. By the time we adjourned, Caleb looked pale, smaller somehow. The same brother who once stole from me without blinking now couldn't meet my eyes. The next move was his, but for the first time it didn't matter, because I wasn't playing defense anymore. The day after mediation, Dad called again. He asked me to meet him at the family lawyer's office. This time he didn't sound hesitant. He sounded resolute. I arrived at the small brick building just before noon. Inside, Dad and Mr. Carlisle, our estate lawyer, were already seated. A thick file lay open on the table. My name was on the front page. "We're formalizing everything today," Dad said, his voice steady. "I've signed the new will. You are now officially reinstated. 50% of the boutique, equal inheritance on the rest." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of vindication settle in. Mr. Carlyle handed me a copy to review. I skimmed through it, noting every clause. There were no tricks, no loopholes. For the first time in months, things looked clear. Dad glanced toward the door. Caleb knows. He left the house last night, said he needed time to think. Where is Mom? She's staying quiet, not apologizing, not defending Caleb either. Just quiet. I didn't know what hurt more, her betrayal or her silence. Later that evening, Rachel and I walked through the boutique going over plans. Despite everything, business was doing well. She looked over at me and smiled. You know, we've talked about expanding for years. Maybe now's the time. I raised an eyebrow. Seriously, after all this, especially after all this, she said, you've earned something new, something that's yours. The idea took root. A second location, a fresh start. I called Mark to run it by him. He was thrilled. You build it, he said. I'll invest. I'd rather put my money behind someone who earned it. Within a week, we toured potential spaces across Charleston. We found a vacant storefront on King Street, spacious, modern, but with just enough charm to feel like us. I signed a lease the following Thursday. Meanwhile, Caleb's situation deteriorated. Word had spread, clients pulled back, acquaintances distanced themselves. His fancy car disappeared from the driveway. Rumors swirled that he had moved in with a friend across town. One morning, Dad called to say he'd met with the district attorney. We're pursuing charges, he said. Forgery, fraud, misappropriation of funds. They're opening a case. Are you sure you want to do this? I don't want to, he replied. But it's the right thing. Caleb crossed a line. This isn't just a family matter anymore. I sat with that for a while. Justice felt close, but it also felt cold, necessary but painful. Rachel stood beside me as I filed my final affidavit, the last document, the last piece. As we left the courthouse, she took my hand. How do you feel? Relieved. Not happy. Not yet. But relieved. Maybe that's a start. And maybe it was. Across town, the new boutique space waited. Clean walls, empty racks, a blank slate. It was time to build something real again. We named it Wallace & Kobe. Not just a boutique, but a statement. A new beginning that honored my father and everything we had gone through. The grand opening was understated but full of heart. Rachel stood next to me in front of the freshly painted sign as we cut the ribbon. It felt like reclaiming something that had been lost. Customers trickled in. Old faces, new ones, everyone curious, everyone supportive. Some had heard the stories. Most didn't ask. But every now and then someone would look at me a little longer, as if silently saying they knew. And maybe they did. Dad visited often. He never stayed long, just enough to say hello and admire how the place was coming along. He still hadn't fully recovered from what had happened, but he was there trying. His presence, even silent, carried weight. It told me he was proud even if he couldn't say it outright. Mom came once. She didn't speak much. Walked around the store, touched a few of the jackets, nodded politely at Rachel, then left without a word. I didn't chase her. There was nothing left to say. Some wounds remain unspoken and some silences are final. Caleb never showed. Last I heard, the investigation was ongoing. No formal charges yet, but the evidence was there. The silence from him was louder than any confession. The boutique had once been a shared dream between me and my father. Now it was mine, rebuilt from betrayal and reclaimed with purpose. Rachel and I worked side by side, pouring everything into the new store. She handled the clients with her usual charm while I focused on design, logistics, and strategy. We expanded our offerings, collaborated with local artisans, and soon had a waiting list for custom suits. It felt right. Not easy, but right. We brought in local high school seniors for internships, offered styling workshops, and even hosted charity events for small business education. Wallace and Comby was becoming more than just a store. It was becoming a community. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Charleston skyline and cast golden light through the glass windows, I found myself alone in the back office. I flipped through old sketches, ones I had made years ago when this dream still felt like a fantasy. And I smiled. Rachel walked in, leaned against the doorframe, and said, "Feels different now, doesn't it?" "It does," I said. "It feels earned." We didn't need to say more. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, about deciding who I wanted to be after everything and who I didn't want to be. The version of myself I had lost was slowly coming back, but stronger, wiser. People talk about karma like it's some mystical force, but sometimes it's just the long, slow unfolding of truth, of consequences. Justice doesn't always come with sirens and courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives quietly in choices made and truths exposed. My family didn't break in a day, and it won't heal in one either. But at least for now, I know where I stand, and I know what I've built won't be taken from me again. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that forgiveness isn't always about others. Sometimes it's about yourself, about letting go, not to forget, but to move forward. There's power in choosing peace even when you've earned the right to rage. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Caleb will face consequences, maybe not. Maybe my mother will come around, maybe not. But I'll be here living honestly, building something real. And so I did. Have you ever been betrayed by someone close to you? What happened? Share your story in the comments. And if you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.